I went camping alone in late October in a part of northern Idaho I hadn't explored before. I didn't have a specific plan in mind. I just wanted to get out for a few nights, sleep in the cold air, cook over a fire, and let the quiet work on my nerves a bit. I'd been dealing with a lot, work, relationship stuff, the usual, and I needed that stillness you can only really get far away from everything else. The spot I picked wasn't marked. I'd driven my truck about 6 miles down a service road that looked like it hadn't been graded in years, then hiked another couple miles down a trail that barely existed. It was one of those places where you know no one's been through recently because spider webs stretch across the path and there's no clear sign of any other boots hitting the dirt. I found a clearing near a stream, just a decent open area with enough flat space for my tent and a little fire pit someone had clearly used at some point years ago. There were a few chunks of moss-covered stone arranged like old camp stools around it. I set up camp quickly: tent, sleeping pad, sleeping bag, water filters, food bag strung up between 2 trees well off from my sleeping area. The first night was perfect. Cold, dead quiet except for the stream and the occasional cracking sound from the trees settling in. The stars were so bright it almost didn't feel like night. I made some rice and beans, drank tea, then just sat by the fire until I felt tired enough to crawl into the tent. I read for maybe 15 minutes, then passed out hard. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. I sat up, zipped out of my bag, and stepped out barefoot, standing on the cold nylon floor of the tent for a second to listen. It was still. No wind, no bugs, just the stream. I stepped out, squatted behind a bush, then came back in and settled again. I didn't even need the headlamp. But just before I fell asleep again, I heard something. Not a big noise, just the sound of small rocks shifting. It wasn't coming from the stream side. It was coming from the direction of the trees behind where I'd hung the food. I figured maybe a raccoon was sniffing around, but I'd put the food up properly. Didn't hear it again, so I let it go and drifted off. The next morning, I checked the area. The food was untouched. No prints on the dirt, nothing knocked over, but it still stuck with me how clear that noise had been. Just one short sound, like someone had taken a step on loose gravel, then froze. I went on a short hike that day, nothing crazy, just up along the stream. I fished a little but didn't catch anything. Came back mid-afternoon, ate, read, chopped some kindling. I kept glancing around without thinking about it too much. Just a little more alert than the day before. That second night felt different from the start. I tried to shake it off, but there was a weight to the quiet, like the silence wasn't natural anymore. I told myself I was just tired, maybe a little on edge from being alone. I'd been alone in the woods plenty of times before, but something about this felt off. I made a smaller fire that night, ate quickly, sat in my camp chair but didn't stay long. By 8:30, I was already inside the tent. The moon wasn't out, so I used my headlamp to read again. Every now and then, I'd click it off and just listen. Then, just like the night before, around 2 a.m., I woke up. This time not because I had to pee. I didn't know why I'd woken up. I just did. My eyes were open and I was alert in a way that felt wrong. The air inside the tent felt heavy. I stayed perfectly still and listened. That's when I heard it again. The sound of a footstep, crunching gravel, then nothing, then another, closer this time. My tent was zippered up, but I hadn't put the rainfly on, so I could see the outline of the trees through the mesh, and I swear I saw a faint shape pass in front of the clearing. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour, just listening. Whoever or whatever it was, they didn't come closer. I didn't hear more steps, no breaking branches, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I got out and looked around again. Still nothing. No prints, no trash, no damage to anything. My food bag was untouched. I started to feel like maybe I'd imagined it. But then I saw something about 50 yards from camp, off the trail I came in on. There was an old backpack sitting under a tree, the kind of thing someone might have used for hunting or a long hike. Faded green canvas, big central pouch, leather straps. But it didn't look like it had been there long. It wasn't weathered. I opened it up carefully. There were some old canned goods inside. Beans, Spam, a rusted multi-tool, a wool blanket rolled up tight, All of it looked like it had been packed carefully, like someone planned to use it soon. I left it alone. I didn't touch anything else. Just walked back to camp slowly and sat by the dead fire. I felt watched. Every second I was out there, it felt like someone was nearby but never showing themselves. I didn't want to panic. I'm not the panicking type, but I also wasn't going to stay another night. I broke down camp fast, packed up, took only what I needed out of the tree, and got moving. I hiked out quicker than I came in. Took maybe half the time. My legs were moving on their own. I kept checking over my shoulder. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything. But I never shook the feeling. When I finally got back to the truck and turned the engine over, the sound of it starting was one of the best feelings I've had in my life. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town. That night, I stayed at a small motel. Nothing fancy, but I slept with the lights on and a chair jammed under the doorknob. I never reported anything. There was nothing to report. I hadn't seen a face. There hadn't been a threat, technically, just a presence. Something or someone was out there, close enough to be heard, close enough to move while I slept. A week later, I checked the maps again, trying to figure out if there were any cabins or hunting camps nearby. Nothing. That whole area is just marked as federal land. No roads for miles. I still camp. I still go out alone sometimes, but I'm more careful now. I don't wander off trail. I don't camp in places that feel too quiet, and I always listen a little longer before I fall asleep. That backpack still haunts me, though, not just because it was there, but because it was recent, and whoever left it hadn't gone far. I always joked that the scariest thing about camping was having to break camp and drive back to work Monday morning. That was my go-to line whenever someone brought up spooky stories around a fire. I'd say it with a grin, sip from my beer, and watch the trees sway like they were laughing too. But that trip, the one I'm about to tell you about, changed something in me. I still say the same line sometimes, but it doesn't come with a smile anymore. Not since what happened. It was late September when we went out. Me and two buddies from work, Mark and Travis. We all worked in a warehouse just outside Portland, and none of us were strangers to rough weather or sore muscles. We were used to working hard, lifting heavy, and keeping to ourselves. The three of us had done a few trips before, mostly Oregon coast or up around the Columbia Gorge. This time we decided on Gifford Pinchot National Forest, over the border in Washington. I picked it because it was remote, and Travis had been itching to try a spot near Dark Divide. It was far from anything. No cell signal, barely marked roads. We drove in Friday after our shifts, got to the campsite just before sunset. The site was nothing more than a clearing in the trees with an old stone fire ring and a half-collapsed wooden bench. No one else in sight. No other vehicles. No trails marked. We liked it that way. Less noise, more room to breathe. It rained a little that night. Nothing heavy. Just a soft mist in the trees. The kind that settles into your bones without you noticing. We drank a bit, cooked some hot dogs over the fire, and crashed in our tents around midnight. I had my usual setup: canvas tent, thick pad, good sleeping bag. I always bring my Glock too. Not because I expect trouble, but because you never know. The first weird thing happened around 2 a.m. I'd woken up to pee. My bladder's never been kind on cold nights. I got out of the tent, flashlight in one hand, pistol holstered on my belt, and walked about 20 yards off to the tree line. The forest was silent. I mean, completely still. No wind, no bugs, no owls. Just the soft patter of water dropping off branches. Then I heard it. A thud. Not a small one either. It wasn't a branch falling. It sounded heavy, like something landing on soft ground. I froze, turned off the flashlight, and listened. Nothing for maybe 10 seconds. Then another thud, closer this time. Still no breathing, no rustling. Just the sound of weight. I backed up toward the tents, trying not to make a sound. Whatever it was on 2 legs. You can tell. Animals that walk on 4 legs move different. This was too slow, steady, deliberate. I got to my tent and quietly pulled the zipper just enough to get inside. I stayed awake for an hour, maybe 2, but nothing else happened. The next morning, I didn't say anything. Figured maybe it was a deer on uneven terrain or my mind playing tricks. But when we went to check the area later, I saw something I didn't like. There were marks in the soil, not quite footprints, but impressions. Toes, maybe long ones, spaced like a man's gait but deeper. I didn't say anything, and neither did the others, though Mark looked a bit off. Maybe he noticed too. Saturday was cloudy. We spent the day hiking a few ridges and cutting deadfall for firewood. No trails out there, just compass bearings and intuition. We didn't see another soul the whole time. Back at camp that evening, Travis cooked some stew, and we passed a flask around. Still quiet in the woods. No birds, no squirrels. Just wind and the occasional creak of a branch. Around dusk, Mark said he was going to hike down toward the small creek we'd passed earlier to rinse out his mug. He was gone longer than I expected. I figured maybe he needed a moment or was just enjoying the quiet. Then I heard footsteps coming back. Fast. Not a sprint, but quick, nervous strides. He came straight to the fire, sat down, and stared into the flames. Didn't say anything. His hands were shaking, just a little. That night, I kept the Glock within reach. Couldn't sleep. The woods felt wrong, heavy. I lay there listening, the fire outside burning low. At one point, I heard something walking around camp. Not close enough to see its shadow, but close enough that I knew it wasn't one of us going for a piss. I kept still. I didn't unzip the tent or reach for the gun. I just waited. The sound circled twice, then drifted off into the forest. In the morning, I saw more impressions. Same kind of marks, but this time they led right up to the tent. Mark saw them too. He didn't say anything, but he stopped chewing for a second when he looked down. We agreed to break camp early. Said we'd had enough rain and cold. Truth was, we were all a little spooked. Even Travis didn't push to stay longer, and he was the diehard among us. We packed quick. But right when we were loading the last of the gear into the truck, we heard something. A howl. Not a coyote, not a wolf either. I know what those sound like. This was deep, guttural, like something mimicking a howl but not quite getting it right. It echoed once, then stopped. We froze. Nobody said a word. We got in the truck and left. On the drive back, none of us talked. Not until we hit the highway near Randall. That's when Mark finally said, "Something was out there, that's all." Just that. Travis just nodded. I went home, took a hot shower, and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. For days after, I kept seeing those tracks in my head. That deep, broken howl. The feeling of being watched. A week later, I cleaned out my gear and found a tuft of hair stuck to one of the tent stakes. Dark, coarse. Not deer, not bear. I didn't keep it. We didn't report anything. Who would we tell? What would we say? There's no rule that says you have to explain yourself when you feel something off in the woods. Sometimes you just know when it's time to go. I still camp, still hike, but I always bring a gun now. Always. I never go alone. And I never go back to that stretch of woods. I don't care what it was. I don't need to know. I just know it wasn't right. And yeah, packing up to head back to work still sucks. But it's not the scariest part anymore. Not even close. I've always loved backpacking. It started with short hikes when I was younger, then weekend trips once I hit my 20s, and eventually I got into the rhythm of planning longer treks with a group of close friends. All of us are women, and we've always been smart about it. Packing right, researching our trails, and preparing for the unexpected. We never set out to prove anything. We just liked the silence, the space, the way the forest breathed differently than the city did. That trip took place in late August, somewhere in the Olympic National Forest in Washington. It was one of our longer outings, 6 days planned on a less traveled loop we had read about on an old forum. We parked our cars, shouldered our packs, and started the climb in with full spirits. There were 6 of us. Me, Dana, Jess, Marla, Nina, and Sophie. We'd all camped together before, so we knew the group dynamics. Everyone had their role, and we moved smoothly. Our first 2 nights went without issue. No signal, no distractions, just the forest around us. We kept a small fire at night, not for cooking much, mostly just warmth and a little comfort. Each of us had our own tent, but we always camped close together, usually within a few feet of each other. That third day, we found a small lake just off the trail and decided it would be our camp spot. It was stunning. No one else around. The water was glassy, clear enough to see the stones on the bottom, and surrounded by tall pines that curved over like a natural shelter. We set up camp early and went for a swim, taking turns while some of us stayed near the camp. The air was still and everything felt right. We laughed, sunbathed on the rocks, and shared trail snacks. That night, something shifted. I woke up to the sound of soft crunching. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer nosing around for food. But then the sound didn't match. It wasn't the aimless stepping of a four-legged animal. It was paced. 2 feet, slow, deliberate steps. I stayed still, barely breathing, and listened. The steps circled the tents. Then they paused. I heard nothing for a long while, just the quiet hush of trees moving in the breeze. The next morning, we all looked a little off. No one had slept great, and eventually, Nina admitted she thought she'd seen someone standing between the trees when she went to pee in the night. She hadn't said anything then because she wasn't sure. She thought maybe it was her eyes playing tricks on her. That afternoon, we noticed something else. While swimming again, Jess saw someone in the woods. Not up close, but watching from a distance. At first, she thought it was one of us, but we were all accounted for. He didn't move when she looked at him, just stood there between 2 trees. She called out, but by the time we all got out of the water and went to look, he was gone. We considered leaving then, but it had been a long hike in and we were far from the trailhead. We were also stubborn, maybe too much so we decided to tighten up. That night, instead of spreading our tents like usual, we circled them, close enough that we could reach each other in seconds if needed. Each tent had a blade of some kind inside, saws, pocket knives, even a hiking pole sharpened crudely. It was probably more psychological than practical, but it helped. That night, the footsteps came back. I lay there in the dark with my hand on my knife, heart pounding. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the steps, soft, barely brushing the pine needles, moving carefully around us. Then there was a sudden noise, a twig snapping sharply, like someone slipped. My blood went cold. I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. Then silence again. It lasted until the birds started singing with the sunrise. We got up with heavy eyes. No one had truly slept. Marla found tracks near the edge of camp, boot prints, not ours, deep enough to show he had been close. That broke the last bit of calm. We packed quickly and started toward the next trail junction. It would put us another day closer to the car. We didn't want to run, but none of us felt safe staying. That day was quiet, uncomfortably so. No one talked much. We were too busy looking behind us. By evening, we made it to a clearing near a rocky ridge. It was exposed, and we figured that would give us a better view. No trees for someone to hide in. We set up again in a tight circle. It was colder up there, and the wind cut harder, but we felt safer with the open sky above us. We didn't sleep much again. None of us wanted to. We took shifts staying awake, each of us watching the edges of the ridge. There were no footsteps that night, no movement, but in the morning we saw something that chilled us deeper than anything before. A small pile of stones had been made at the edge of camp, just 5 rocks stacked neatly. None of us did it. We hadn't left our tents. There was no other reason for it than someone being there. Someone close enough to sneak in and place that little marker without any of us hearing. That was it. We didn't talk about it, we just packed and moved. The last 2 days back to the trailhead felt longer than the rest of the trip combined. Every sound, every tree shadow, felt like something watching. I don't remember much from that stretch except the feeling in my chest. Tight and constant, like being hunted even if we never saw him again. When we finally made it back to the cars, we sat there for a long time before driving, just catching our breath. We didn't call anyone. There was nothing to report. No crime, no name, no face. Just the creeping knowledge that someone had been with us, choosing not to strike, not to talk, just to watch. It's been years now. We still go backpacking, but we do it differently. We bring radios. We stick closer to known trails. And we never camp solo anymore, even for a night. That trip changed something for all of us. It didn't steal our love for the wild, but it made us sharper, more aware. I still think about him sometimes. The way he moved, the silence, the stones. We'll never know what he wanted or why he didn't do more than watch. But knowing he could've, that he was that close, is more than enough to keep the fear alive. And that's the thing most people don't realize about camping way out there. It's not animals you should worry about. It's not the dark or the weather. It's the ones who choose to follow without being seen. The ones who don't make a sound. The ones who leave just enough behind to let you know they were there. I've always been the kind of person who finds peace outdoors. After the Corps, I found the woods to be one of the few places where my mind could finally go quiet. I don't go out looking for anything special, just a flat spot to pitch a tent, a bit of tree cover, and my dogs running through the underbrush like they're chasing ghosts. That's all I need. But the world has changed since the days I first started disappearing into the wilderness for a weekend. There are more people out there now, not always the kind you want to run into. This story happened back in 2018, up in a wooded stretch of land near the Olympic National Forest in Washington. It's not an official campground, just a few rough trails that lead out to open spots used by hunters or folks like me who prefer a quieter kind of camping. I'd brought along my 2 dogs, Murph, a 90-pound black lab with a head like a cinder block, and Jessie, a lean mutt with a nose that never stops working. I also had my 9mm tucked into a thigh holster, more for peace of mind than anything. I've never liked the idea of being out there unarmed. It was late May. The weather was clear, days in the high 60s, nights dropping down into the 40s. Perfect for sleeping under the stars. I hiked about 3 miles in from the old service road, found a clearing that backed up against a low ridge, and set up camp. I kept it basic: tent, small fire pit, folding chair, and my pack. Dogs ranged around the area sniffing everything, leaving their mark. I did a perimeter walk, looking for signs of animals or people. Nothing unusual. The first night was quiet. I cooked a little rice and canned chicken on my small propane burner, gave the dogs their kibble, then settled in to watch the sky darken. I've always loved how black it gets out there. No light pollution, just a thick blanket of stars. The dogs curled up close to the fire, and I eventually crawled into my tent, zipped up, and fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I woke up the first time. Murph was standing near the flap of the tent, his head low, tail stiff. Jessie was up too, ears twitching. I reached for the flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to look out. The forest was still, dead quiet. That was the first thing that bothered me. No crickets, no wind, nothing. I stayed still, hand on my pistol, listening. After a few minutes, things seemed to go back to normal. Dogs laid down. I tried to sleep. Next morning, I walked a bit farther out, thinking maybe a bear had passed through or some other animal. Saw nothing. No tracks, no broken brush, no scent that got the dogs worked up again. But I still felt off. Couldn't put my finger on it. Something just didn't sit right. It's the kind of thing you learn to trust after enough years dealing with people and situations where reading the room meant staying alive. Day 2 was uneventful. We hiked a little, I took some notes in my journal, read for a while. Dogs never strayed far. When the sun dipped low, I lit another small fire and made dinner. This time it was instant mashed potatoes and some sausage I'd packed in a cooler. I shared a bit with the dogs, poured myself a drink, and leaned back against a stump to watch the sky fade again. It's moments like that when everything makes sense. The world falls away, and you're left with the quiet and the cold and the rhythm of your own breathing. Then, around 11 p.m., the dogs started acting up. Not barking, just alert, tense. Jessie paced the edge of the clearing. Murph planted himself between me and the woods, just staring into the dark. I put out the fire and turned on my headlamp, scanning the treeline. Nothing, no sounds, but the hair on my arms was up. I unzipped the tent early that night, laid the gun next to me, and waited for sleep that didn't come easy. I heard it around 3 a.m., a branch cracking, not like a squirrel or raccoon, too heavy. I sat up fast, pistol in hand, and waited. Murph was growling low, teeth barely visible in the dark. Jesse stood perfectly still. Then silence again. Long, stretching silence. I stayed up till dawn, eyes burning, ears tuned to every rustle of wind. When the sun came up, I walked the perimeter again. That's when I saw it, boot prints. Not mine. Not fresh either, but not old. The kind of deep print you get when someone's trying to walk softly on uneven ground. They circled around the back of my camp, came close, then faded off down the ridge. I didn't pack up right away. Part of me didn't want to give in to fear, but another part, something deeper, colder, told me I wasn't alone out there. I stayed one more night, not sure why. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't afraid. But I didn't sleep. That night, everything was wrong. The dogs were a wreck, panting, pacing, never settling. I kept the fire small, gun in hand. Around midnight, I saw movement, just outside the firelight. A figure low to the ground, watching. I didn't shout, didn't move, just raised the pistol and stared until it shifted and slipped into the trees. I didn't fire, still not sure why. I broke camp before sunrise, packed fast, checked every corner of the site. Nothing taken, nothing left behind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting, watching. I hiked back to the truck with both dogs tight at my side. When I got to the trailhead, I saw the other vehicle. Older model Ford Explorer, beat up and half covered in mud. Parked about 100 feet off in the brush like someone didn't want it noticed. Plates were gone. Inside, I saw a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and what looked like a hatchet on the seat. I didn't report it. Maybe I should have, but I've dealt with enough red tape to know how that usually ends. I just got in my truck, locked the doors, and left. I still camp. I still go out, still walk the ridges and sleep under the stars. But I don't go alone anymore, and I never go without my dogs, or my gun, because no matter how strong you are, no matter what you've seen or done, there's always something or someone worse out there. And in the deep woods, far from help, all you've got is your senses, your steel, and the instinct to survive. That night didn't break me, but it reminded me that peace comes with a price. And sometimes it means standing in the dark, facing the unknown, and holding your ground until the sun comes up again. I never camp or hike without a gun. That's not paranoia. That's just experience. I've done enough backwoods camping and solo hiking to know that when you're deep in the forest, far from cell towers and rangers, there are things to worry about, and they're not bears or mountain lions. People don't think about the people out there, the ones you don't expect. I do. Always have. Especially after what happened a few years back in the Olympic National Forest. It was a solo trip. Early summer. June, I think. I had planned a 3-day camp along a less-traveled ridgeline, some 6 miles in from the nearest Forest Service road. I took my usual gear, backpack, tent, water filter, food, stove, and of course my Glock 20. That one goes with me everywhere. 10mm, heavy duty. Not because I'm looking for a fight, but because I know the places I go don't always care about what you want. The first day was quiet. I parked my truck at a pull-off near a logging road, locked it up, and hiked in under clear skies. The air smelled like wet pine and fresh dirt. My boots crunched over the old trails, and the only sounds were birds and the wind pushing through the upper branches. It took about 4 hours to reach the ridge I had planned to camp near. I found a spot near a cluster of fir trees, cleared a patch, and set up my tent. I cooked some food, filtered some water from a nearby trickle of a creek, and sat on a rock watching the shadows stretch out over the valley below. It was a peaceful night, the kind that makes you feel good about being alive. Stars above, no signs of animals or people. Just the crackle of the stove cooling down and the occasional snapping branch from a deer or raccoon in the brush. I turned in after dark, slept light like I always do out there. I woke up a few times during the night, just listening, just being aware. Nothing unusual. Some rustling far off, but nothing worth checking. Still, I kept the gun next to me, chambered, safety on. Second day, I woke early, ate a protein bar, and packed a light bag to explore a nearby slope I had scouted on topo maps. There were old logging remnants out there, half-fallen bridges, rusted cables, maybe some forgotten cabins. I made my way down, found the remnants of a trail, and followed it. I saw a deer, then a bobcat. Skittish, quick, harmless, just doing their thing. Around midday, I found what I had been looking for. The remains of an old logging cabin. Just the frame, really. Moss-covered wood, sunken roof, a pile of old beer cans. Someone had been out here more recently than the builders. Looked like teenagers had used it as a party spot a few years back. Nothing weird, just broken glass and the lingering feeling of rowdy laughter now gone. But as I made my way back, I noticed something that gave me pause. On the trail back to camp, a new footprint. Deep heel, shallow toe, not mine. I double-checked by stepping next to it. Mine was different. I wear size 11, wide tread. This was bigger, maybe size 13, heavier too, maybe a boot. Could have been old, but it looked fresh. The edges were still sharp in the damp earth, and there hadn't been any rain. I slowed my pace and scanned the woods as I walked. No sounds, no movement. Still, I kept one hand near my waistband. When I got back to camp, I did a quick inventory. Nothing touched. Food bags still hung up. Tent unzipped but not opened. Everything was where I left it. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. Stuck to me like sweat. That night, I set up a perimeter around the camp. Not traps or anything, just some fishing line with bells and tin cans. Real old school, but it works. I also cleared some brush so I had a clear line of sight in all directions from the tent. I cooked, ate, and didn't make a fire. Didn't want to signal my position more than I had to. As dusk dropped into night, I sat with my back against a tree, gun across my lap. I didn't expect anything, but I wasn't going to be surprised. Then, just after midnight, I heard it. A metallic clink, just one, from the direction of the northern side of camp. I froze, listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no rustling. Just quiet, too quiet. I waited, 10 minutes, then 20. I stayed alert, but I didn't hear another sound. Around 1:30, I finally slipped back into the tent but didn't sleep. Just lay there, listening, breathing slow. The gun was in my hand the whole time. At first light, I checked the line. Sure enough, the northern run was tripped. The can had fallen, line broken. But the weird part was the knot looked like it had been cut, not snapped. Clean slice. That was enough for me. I decided to pull out that morning. I packed quick, ate nothing, just stuffed gear into my pack and got moving. I took a different route back. Not the trail I came in on. I didn't want to walk into someone's ambush if that was what it was. I followed the ridgeline longer, then cut down a deer path I'd noticed on the map. Slower, but less predictable. About an hour into the hike, I stopped to rest near a rock outcropping. That's when I saw them. Two figures, maybe 300 yards down the slope, dressed in dark clothes. One had a rifle, not slung, in hand. They weren't moving fast, but they were looking, scanning. I stayed low, watched. They didn't see me. I stayed frozen behind the rocks until they moved on, off toward the direction of my original camp. They didn't look like hunters. No blaze orange, no visible packs, just rifles and quiet walking. That sealed it. I stayed off trail the rest of the way, bushwhacked through thick stuff, got cut up and soaked from pushing through wet brush. But I didn't care. I was not letting those guys get behind me. I made it back to the road by late afternoon. My truck was still there. No signs of tampering. I started it up and drove, not stopping until I hit the main highway. I didn't report it. To who? Cops don't patrol those woods. Rangers might log it, but they'd just chalk it up to another weird camper story. Maybe it was squatters. Maybe meth heads. Maybe something worse. Doesn't matter. I don't go back to that area anymore. But I still camp. Still hike. Still go out where it's quiet and real. Only now I do it with even more caution. People don't talk about how weird and dangerous the woods can be. They think it's just nature, just animals and trees. But there are people out there, people who don't want to be found, people who get real nervous when they see someone stumble into their space. Sometimes they just watch. Sometimes they get close. Sometimes they cut your tripwires in the dark. That's why I never go out without a gun. Not because I want to use it, but because one day I might have to. And when that day comes, I'd rather be the one who walks out of those woods. It happened in the summer of 1996, and even now, when I think back to it, there's this cold feeling that settles somewhere deep in my chest. That summer was hot, especially for Washington State, but it was still cool enough at night to make camping bearable. I was in my mid-20s then, working in construction during the week, and spending weekends hiking and camping wherever I could. That trip was supposed to be a break. Me and a buddy, Sam, just two guys looking to unplug, hike out, crack a couple beers by the fire, and maybe fish if we found water. We drove east of Seattle, deep into the forests around Wenatchee. There's a lot of land out there, dirt roads that seem to go on forever, and switchbacks that turn you around so much you couldn't retrace your path even if you tried. The deeper you go, the less likely you are to see another car, let alone another person. That's what we wanted, somewhere way off the grid, out of reach, out of sight. We didn't check in with anybody. No cell phones then. We told our coworkers we were headed out and left it at that. We took Sam's beat-up Jeep Cherokee. That thing rattled and coughed on the gravel roads, but it got us up some steep climbs most sedans wouldn't make. We had our gear, tents, food, fishing poles, and both of us were carrying sidearms. Not something we normally did, but after a couple years of outdoor weekends, we'd both seen enough weird stuff to think better of walking around unarmed. We set up camp by the stream we found a mile or two off a logging road. The water was shallow but clean, and the trees opened just enough for us to build a decent fire without worrying about smoke choking the branches. We weren't the only ones who had ever been there. There were a couple fire rings already laid out, some half-buried trash, even an old metal cooler rusting in the underbrush, but no signs of anyone recent. It felt normal that first night. The fire cracked, the stars came out. We cooked hot dogs on sticks and drank beer until the only sound was the hiss of the coals and the occasional rustle in the woods. You get used to those sounds. Squirrels, maybe a raccoon or two. We slept without any issues, though I woke up once in the early morning, just before light, and had that weird prickling feeling that someone was watching. But I chalked it up to the beer and the unfamiliar place and went back to sleep. The next day we fished a bit, cooked up what little we caught, and explored further up the ridge from where we'd set up. There were no trails, not even game trails, so we were pushing through brush and climbing over logs. Around noon, we came across something strange. Old footprints in a muddy patch of ground near a deadfall. They weren't ours, too far out. The tread was worn but didn't match either of our boots, and they weren't fresh, but they also weren't washed away. Someone else had been out there not long before us. That's not too crazy by itself. People hunt and hike all through those woods, but something about the prints bothered me. They didn't lead anywhere, just came in from the brush and stopped near a tree. No prints leading out. Maybe they got covered. Maybe we just didn't notice them. But even Sam said it was weird. We didn't dwell on it, just made a mental note and kept an extra eye out heading back to camp. Later that afternoon, we started hearing what sounded like chopping in the distance. Not rhythmic like someone building something, but irregular, sharp strikes, then nothing, then more. We thought maybe someone else had come into the area. Didn't think much of it, except that it felt a little close. The sun dipped behind the trees, and by then the sound had stopped. That night, things got real uncomfortable. We were sitting by the fire after dinner. The woods were quiet, but not the usual peaceful quiet. It was this pressed down silence, like everything had gone still. Sam noticed it first. He stood up and looked out into the trees like he'd heard something. We didn't talk much, just sat still, listening. Then I heard it, twigs snapping. Slow, careful, like someone trying to walk quietly but stepping on things anyway. Not a deer. Too slow, too deliberate. It circled us for what felt like an hour, never coming in close, but always staying just out of reach of the firelight. I remember gripping my pistol, knuckles white. We didn't call out, didn't shine flashlights, just waited. Eventually the sound faded, and we stayed by the fire until it burned down to nothing, too nervous to go into the tents. We both slept with our boots on that night, packs ready to grab, weapons by our sides. The next morning we found something that made my stomach turn. On the edge of camp, near where Sam had pissed the night before, someone had carved into a tree. It wasn't deep, just a few quick slashes with something sharp, but it looked deliberate. A half circle, then a jagged line through it. Didn't look like initials or anything normal, just a shape. I still remember it clearly. I took a picture of it years later when I went back, but the tree had rotted by then. We both agreed not to stay another night. Something wasn't right. We packed up quick. As we were loading the Jeep, Sam noticed something else. The back passenger tire had been slashed. Not popped, not flattened by a nail. Slashed. A clean, deep cut like a knife had been dragged across the rubber. It wasn't like that when we parked. We would have noticed. We changed the tire fast. Didn't say much. Both of us were scanning the woods the entire time. I remember sweating even though it was only about 60 degrees out. The kind of sweat that comes when you know something is wrong, but you can't explain it. We got out of there by early afternoon, but the road back down was rough, and there were long stretches where we had to go slow. Around one of the bends, we saw an old pickup pulled halfway into the brush. No plates, windows gone, rusted through in places, looked abandoned. But what got me was the pile of beer cans stacked neatly on the hood, like someone had been using it recently. Sam didn't stop, neither did I. We just kept going. A few miles later, we saw someone standing off the side of the road. Just a man, maybe mid-40s, no shirt, jeans torn at the knees, and no shoes. He had a beard and long, greasy hair. His skin looked sunburned and dirty. He wasn't waving or asking for help, just standing there watching us as we drove past. I looked back through the side mirror, and he hadn't moved an inch. We hit pavement a little after 4 and didn't say anything until we were halfway back to Seattle. Then Sam said, "That guy in the woods." He had something in his hand. I hadn't seen it clearly, but I didn't argue. We didn't call the cops. What could we say? Some weird guy stalked our camp, maybe slashed our tire, carved up a tree. There was nothing to report. And besides, neither of us really wanted to get drawn into anything more than we already had. Months later, I read a short article buried in the back of the local paper. They'd found a shallow grave near one of the old forest roads in that same area. No name, no ID, just a body partially buried under rocks and logs. The condition of the body made it hard to say what happened, but they estimated the death had occurred sometime that summer. I never went back to that spot. I camped after that, sure, but I never went that deep without backup. And I always carried. Always. There are things that happen out in those woods that don't make the news. Things people don't want to talk about because it's easier to pretend they didn't happen. Like that carved symbol. Like the man on the side of the road. Like the sound of footsteps circling your tent in the middle of nowhere, long after the fire's gone out. They say nature is peaceful, but I learned the hard way that it can be lawless, too. No cops, no phones, just trees and whatever's lurking behind them. I don't tell many people this story. When I do, they always ask why I didn't shoot, why I didn't confront whoever it was. But it's not like the movies. You don't shoot into the dark when you're not sure what you're shooting at. You don't pick fights when you're outnumbered or out of your element. You just survive. And that's what we did. We made it out. But not everyone does. And that's the part people forget when they go hiking into the woods with nothing but a backpack and a smile. Some people never come back. And sometimes the only ones who know what really happened are the trees. And they don't talk. It's been a long time since I've thought about what happened up there. Sometimes I think I've managed to push it down far enough that it doesn't come back up unless I dig for it. Other times, it just creeps in out of nowhere like a smell or a sound triggering it. What really makes it worse is how I still can't explain parts of it in any logical way, even though nothing about it was supernatural. It wasn't ghosts or curses. It was just people. Real people. And silence. Too much silence, the kind that makes you start thinking maybe you're not supposed to know more. The story I'm about to tell you is the other experience that me and her had. And by her, I mean Maya. She and I used to go camping a lot. Back then, we were just friends. We had a kind of quiet understanding. Both of us liked being out where nobody could bother us, especially after stressful weeks at work. This trip was supposed to be one of those peaceful escapes. But it didn't end that way. It was late September when we went. We wanted that off-season quiet, but not too deep into October when it gets too cold. We picked a state forest we hadn't been to before, one up north where the trails ran for miles and there weren't too many designated camping spots. The kind of place where you walk in and find your own patch of flat land and set up wherever. No signs, no patrols, no people unless they really wanted to be there. And we really wanted to be there. We parked at the edge of an old access road and hiked about 5 miles in. There were no other cars when we arrived, which we both liked. The trail was overgrown in places, especially after the first mile. We'd marked a few spots on the map where there were streams and elevation drops so we could find a good place to pitch. Around mid-afternoon, we came to a small clearing near a shallow creek. On one side were tall pines, and the other side sloped down to a rocky cut that echoed faint water sounds. It was perfect. We set up the tent, made a small fire circle out of stone, and went about gathering dry wood. That first night was uneventful, just the way we liked it. We sat by the fire, ate dehydrated meals, watched the stars. I remember thinking how silent it was. The wind would pick up now and then through the trees, but it was the kind of silence you can only get that far out. Not even crickets. The second day, we hiked up the ridge behind camp. There was no trail, just deadfall and loose mossy rock. We had no signal, but I had my GPS tracker on for mapping our route. We climbed until we hit a long slope of boulders. Some had clearly fallen from higher up. As we scrambled across, Maya pointed out something odd. One of the boulders had these deep grooves in it, like someone had dragged something sharp across it in straight lines. At first, I thought maybe it was just erosion or some natural weathering, but these lines were weirdly clean and long. They ran parallel, a setup for like massive claws, but they weren't deep like an animal's gouges. More like something heavy was dragged with metal edges. I didn't say that to Maya, but I think she thought the same. We kept climbing and eventually hit a flat shelf with a wide view of the valley below. That's when we saw it. Far across on the next ridge, maybe a mile away, was a shape. Small, dark, unmoving. Could have been a tree stump or someone sitting on a rock, but it was too perfectly vertical. Maya squinted and muttered something under her breath. I pulled out my little monocular and took a look. I couldn't make out much, but it didn't look natural. Just a dark, upright shape with a kind of thinness to it. We sat there for a bit, watching. It never moved. Eventually, we chalked it up to a tree or maybe even a small blind someone built for hunting. Still, something about it stuck with me. We made our way down as the sun dipped low. That night felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the quiet felt heavier. The kind where you find yourself listening for things instead of just enjoying it. Around 1 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first, no sound had woken me, but I was wide awake, like something had clicked on in my head. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling of the tent. Then I noticed Maya was up too. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her breathing. She was awake, lying still like I was. Then there was a sound. It was faint. A branch snapped, but not near us. It came from farther off, maybe 20 or 30 yards. Then another. Not fast, not like an animal charging through, just slow and deliberate. One snap, then a pause. Then another. I didn't move. I just listened. Eventually, it stopped. I don't know how long we lay there after that, but it was hours before I fell back asleep. In the morning, neither of us said anything about it. We just moved slower, like our bodies knew we didn't want to stay long. After breakfast, we took a short walk upstream to filter water. That's when we found the footprint. It was in the soft mud just off the bank. A single print, not booted, bare. Long toes, wide pad. Way too big for Maya and not mine either. I wear a size 12 and this was larger. But it wasn't just that, it was fresh. The edges hadn't sagged or filled in. Whatever it was, it had walked by recently. We both looked at each other, but still said nothing. We packed the gear quickly, much quicker than usual. We didn't even finish our second meal pack. There was a weird tension in the air, like a storm that never breaks. As we walked out, we stayed silent for the first mile. The trail was empty. No signs of other people. No wrappers, no trash, no fire pits. Nothing to suggest anyone else had been out here for weeks. We made it to a narrow part of the trail, a spot where a rock wall rose up to our left and a steep drop fell off to the right. I stopped. Something was there. About 10 feet up the rock face, someone or something had stacked a set of stones. Not just a casual pile. Balanced. Intentional. The stones were smeared with something dark. Could have been old blood or maybe mud, but it had a strange color, brownish red, dried. At the base of the stack was a feather. Clean white, but the tip looked burned. We didn't stop long, just enough to see it and get moving again. Maya walked faster than I'd ever seen her. By the time we saw the car through the trees, we both looked like we hadn't slept in days. Before we left, I took one last look behind us. Nothing moved. The forest was dead still. We never talked about it much afterward. Just that it wasn't right. That someone had been out there and wanted to be left alone. Or worse, didn't. The weirdest part? A month later, I got curious. I went online to see if anything strange had happened in that forest. Found barely anything. No missing person reports, no sightings. Just one old forum post from maybe 10 years back. Buried deep. Some guy talking about seeing strange stacks of stones and finding a deer carcass with its legs bent backwards. It had one comment on it: "Don't go back." I never brought it up with Maya again. Not in detail. We never went camping together after that. She moved out west a year later. Every now and then, we send each other quick messages. Never long ones. But a while back, she replied to something I sent her, and at the end of her message she wrote, "At least we didn't see who made the footprint." That line stuck with me, told me all I needed to know about what she felt. That she'd thought the same things. That whatever was out there wasn't just a hunter or some recluse. It was someone who didn't want to be seen, but maybe let us know they were watching. Carefully, silently, and I think the silence after, that layer of people not talking about it, is the most unsettling thing. Because people have been out there. People have seen things. But no one wants to be the one to really say it out loud. I never went back to that area. I still have the GPS file from the hike saved on a flash drive somewhere, but I don't open it. I don't zoom in on the satellite view. I don't want to see if that shape is still sitting on the next ridge, or if maybe, just maybe, it moved. And that's the truth of the other experience. The one we don't tell, not because it's too wild, but because it's just believable enough to stick with you. Because it was real. Because there's no story to pin it to, no face to give it. Just that silence, and the feeling that we weren't supposed to know more than we already do.